Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Raid Shadow Legends. Today, I want to talk about Hydra and how you can build a team for yourself to farm that sweet mother's milk, like stone skin gear, protection gear, and Mithrala fragments if you haven't had already. Let's get into it. As you all might have known, Hydra was released back then in year 2021. I think it's around December or something like that. So it has been more than a year since it was released, and the reason why I'm making this video now is because I found out that a lot of players still have not obtained Mithrala, maybe due to various reasons like lack of interest or just don't want to do Hydra. Okay, so I'm trying to make a very simple guide, a concept build for you to understand how to tackle Hydra content, so that you can build your own Hydra team. I'm not gonna tell you like you must use specific champions. I just want you to understand the mechanics and so that you can make use of that knowledge and make a team for yourself. Okay, so let's take a look at a few examples. Okay, so if you look at my team for Nightmare, alright, so you can see that I have a mixture of different champions. Because Nightmare is quite hard for me, so I think I have only 2 legit damage dealers. Okay, I'm lucky to have a 5-star Blessing Chris, so he is somewhat a damage dealer with the Brimstone. But if you forget the fact about the Brimstone, he is still a very good support champion, right? So as the difficulty goes up, you need more and more support, alright, to hit the 1 key threshold. So let's start with the basics. Okay, let's start with maybe hard. For hard, right, depending on your progression level, I think you can put at least 3 damage dealers. So at the hard stage, you really only need raw damage. You can choose to use HP burn as well. HP burn will do very well in a hard stage. Okay, so as you can see, this is my arena build Cupidus. This is a PvE build Corona and Venus. Okay, I am not using any special enemy max hit point champions that we will get to later. So I think the ratio matters here. How many support champs you should be putting in, how many damage dealers you should be putting in, is really varies based on your gear level and your champion quality. Okay, so if your roster is well enough, you can actually put a ratio like this and you can do really well. So let's use this as an example and talk about what is the most important debuffs you need for Hydra. Okay, the most important debuff you need for Hydra is, number 1, is not actually block buff, is decreased speed. Speed matters in Hydra. Is in fact the most important debuff you will require, because imagine this: you are slowing the bosses down, and then that means you are taking more turns to interact with them. Okay, so with that being said, decreased speed is the most important. Number 2 would be block buffs. Block buffs, I think you will require that debuff in almost every rotation because of the poison hit. Mainly because of that. As you all know, poison hit will put up the poison cloud debuff, which is very annoying to deal with. So that buff will last for 2 turns. That means you will have a period of time where you're doing minimal damage to the Hydra hits. That being said, if you can block buff at the right timing, you can mitigate that catastrophe. The next thing I want to talk about, okay, since we have decreased speed, right? The most important buff you will need is increased speed. Why? Because you want to maximize the turns you take against the Hydra boss. So maybe if without all these speed modifiers, you were doing like maybe 2-to-1 ratio. But if you have all this in place, you might be doing 3-to-4-to-1 ratio. Alright, that is a lot more as the fight progresses for like 20 to 40 minutes, depending on your level of endurance, your team endurance. Okay, so put that in your mind. Decreased speed has to be AoE, so that every hit gets that decreased speed. Alright, same goes with block buff. So both of them are arguably the most important debuffs you need for Hydra. The next, I would say, tier 2 debuffs that you need is optional. Decrease defense and weaken if you are using enemy max hit point damage dealers. For burn, for HP burn, you don't really need those debuffs. That's why I say it's optional. The next one is attack down. Attack down if you struggle with low hit point and low defense across your champions stats. Let's move on to the most important support mechanics that you need. First, I mentioned previously, it was increased speed. Okay, so who can do increased speed? You can just go to hellhades.com and type increased speed champions. You will get a nice list. So for me, you can see from my example, I have Shamrock doing the increased speed. He is quite fast. He is also doing decreased speed. So you need to look for champs in your roster that can preferably do this both. The best example of such a champion is none other than Lady Kimi. That's why you see I put him in my best Hydra team. Lady Kimi is just crazy. She can decrease speed, AoE decrease speed, and increase speed, and increase accuracy. Oh, not to mention she also decrease accuracy, which is really helpful if you struggle with the stats, because at Nightmare, the Mischief Head has quite a high accuracy to steal your buffs. So if you place decreased speed on the Mischief Head, then you get the gist. He's not gonna steal a lot of buffs from you. So at the same time, when you use Lady Kimi with your debuff first, such as Chris, Geomancer, for example, you can actually the accuracy stats doesn't have to meet the threshold because of her buff, increased accuracy buff. My Chris for Nightmare is only like 260 accuracy. You'll be thinking like, that's not possible, you're not gonna land anything. That's true under normal circumstances, but with Lady Kimi's buff, magic happens. Anyways, back to the concept explanation. So yeah, we have covered like champs like Lady Kimi, Shamrock. If you absolutely don't have these champions, I would suggest someone like a Sylar at least. So you basically separate this decrease speed and increase speed into 2 champions to do the work. That being said, that may lower down your damage output, but if it's enough to get you this 1 key, why not, right? So okay, next we want to talk about block buffs. The 2 most used and most famous block buff champions, none other than Ugo, number 1. He's not placed number 1, sorry. Number 1 in my list is actually Umbral Enchantress. Umbral Enchantress, because of her affinity, she will place block buff to every single head, regardless of their affinity. And then she also has a backup provoke for the Head of Decay. So she is actually like a secondary provoke, if you will, if you don't have a main provoker. Okay, a lot of people just don't think that Umbral Enchantress provoke is good because it has a side effect of locking out all her skills. For me, it's about how you play around that actually. So for me, I can just, because of the main mechanics of the speed mechanics I talked about, I can actually play around the side effects and make her get back to her skill faster. Okay, so besides Umbral, the next best thing is Ugo himself. Ugo, right here, will place a block debuff on every head, and he also brings a good heal if your team lacks those kind of support. Okay, but he has an affinity issue, I would say, against the force affinity. Okay, so we have covered the most important debuffs you need to bring in to Hydra. Now let's talk about the most important support mechanics you need to bring into Hydra. The first, as I mentioned, is increased speed. Okay, I would like to also mention that increased speed, you can use epic champions, not necessarily needs to be a legendary champion. If you have legendary champions like these, please use them. Okay. Okay, so the most important support mechanics that you need. Number 1, revive. Revive, I would say revive and heal, if you can afford that. Okay. Ideally, you want to sustain your entire team longer without the revive, because revive is the absolute last fail-safe plan you have, because there's a side effect to revive. Okay, even though you revive the entire team, it slows down your damage output actually, because everyone is just gaining back their turn meter, and the Hydra bots is still taking their turns. Okay, unless you bring in someone like Ursula or somebody like that revives the entire comp with a high turn meter. Yeah, so that will be an exceptional. The next would be, if you can afford it, ally protection. Ally protection will do a lot of damage mitigation across your team. Okay, if you don't have a Chris, the next best thing is actually B6. Here I would recommend a few champs, but I'm not gonna tell you which specific champs, because you need to mix and match that champ with whatever your other champs are doing. Your other champs are bringing into the mix. So next best thing is actually B6, or the next best thing is Guardian set. Let me show you one thing, how I use. Okay, here I also want to mention that one champ is actually very underrated for Hydra, is this guy, Mr. Norok. Why people hate on him, I don't understand. You can just put him in Guardian set, and it will provide an invisible ally protection across your team. So you can actually build him fast enough than these stats, obviously, if you have the gear, so that he can keep taking turns. If he keeps taking turns, that means he'll be healing from the Guardian set. Okay, so he also brings a block buff, AoE block buff to all the hits, but same like Ugo, he will suffer an affinity against force affinity. So his block buff is actually 3 turn. I did not have him booked because my roster is quite stacked. I'm not using him much in Hydra, but if you have him, he is a very good option for Hydra. He is bringing in also this damage mitigation passive. It's actually literally the same with Duchess, because you're taking the minimal 15% damage mitigation across the board. That is same like Duchess. If I can just find her, it's actually the same with Duchess, because Duchess damage mitigation is 15% from bosses. Okay, so he is a very good champ. The next thing you can bring, depending if you have those champs, is actually Sifi. Increased defense champ. Increased defense not only benefits your defense based damage dealers, but here it's for you to sustain longer without needing to be revived. So as you can see, I designed this team revolving around Sifi that will increase the defense of everybody. So I try not to bring champions that would require attack based champions, basically, because they will not benefit from that to do their damage. So as you can see here, Geomancer fits right into this, because Geomancer is such a god. His HP burn he will just be placing a lot of HP burn around across the Hydra hits, and he does not need attack. He just needs hit point and defense. Same goes with Husk. Husk, yes, some of Husk's skill would be based off attack multipliers, but we want him to survive longer. He has a very high hit point, so what we can do is just to increase the defense, and he will be doing just fine. So Chris, you already get familiar with defense based champ. Same goes with Umbral, the defense based champ. The only anomaly here is just Inquisitor Shamail. Shamail is just there to automatically cleanse the fear this rotation. So the next thing I want to talk about is HP burn damage dealers versus enemy max hit point champions. Okay, so going back to the previous team. Okay, HP burn is more favored for stages like hard and brutal, because the HP burn take damage is static. It will not grow according to the enemy max hit point. The damage is the same across all the stages. You can still use HP burn in Nightmare, it's just not as much for you to reach the threshold, damage threshold for one key. Okay, so there are also a few mistakes I see players using, is using Geomancer with someone like a Ninja, or someone like a Skia, or someone like a Drang. These three champions will activate HP burn, which is great. Normally it's great because you want to do damage really fast with HP burn. But when you use a Geomancer, please take note that you are using him. His burn has to be placed as long as possible on the Hydra head. You do not want, preferably never ever wear off his HP burn from the head, because his HP burn is like something he lash on to that Hydra head. He will punish that Hydra head by reflecting the damage to that Hydra head. So as long as the HP burn that Geomancer places is still around, his passive will be doing a lot of damage, even more than the HP burn itself, to the Hydra boss. So that's how you use a Geomancer. Please don't make the mistake of using HP burn activation champions together with Geomancer. That would defeat the purpose of using this godly epic champ. Next thing I want to talk about is the enemy max hit point champions. Everyone knows Acresia. I don't have her. So the next best thing is actually Royal Guard and Husk. So these are the most commonly used champions in Hydra. They scale even better when you're using them in Brutal or Nightmare. The higher you go, the more damage that they will actually do. Okay. So normally how do you build them is you can either build them with a Savage set, or the better set to put them on is actually Relentless set on Royal Guard and Husk, because if they take extra turns, they will get back to that big skill really fast. So that is how you normally do damage, and before your team comp falls apart. Because at one point of time, no matter how strong your team are, the heads will keep devouring everybody. So that means you have to do as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time before that happens. That's how you get to 1 key. I hope that this episode or this information would be beneficial to you to build your own team in order to farm those precious resources. Okay, I know that maybe a lot of players don't even fancy getting stone skin or whatsoever because they think it's a lot of effort, but I think the most important thing is to learn to love Hydra. Once you get to understand how they do, how they work, then you enjoy it. So that was the most challenging content I ever created, because there's a lot of information to disseminate in a short time. So I hope this episode would help you guys. So if you like my content, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next one.